So, John, I want to start with you. What was the animating principle behind, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I have to lean forward. Another thing you can work on, by the way.
So what was the animating principle behind Boston Scientific? What was the problem that you and your co-founders were trying to solve?
I'm not sure it was a problem as much as it was an opportunity. The first product we had was a steerable catheter, a catheter that you could remotely deflect with a hand control, so you could aim it and go any place in the body. Mm-hmm. And there have been other devices that got close, but this one just did more. And the idea was mostly catheters were used for diagnostic purposes, so that the surgeon would do a better job. He would know more as a result of the tests that we did. But I remember saying, gee, while you're there, why don't we fix it? And if we do this right, potentially, it would be through a smaller hole. So in theory, at least, it would be not only less invasive, but less risk, less trauma, less cost, and less time. Time both for the lab that's doing it, cost saving, and for the patient before when they get back to doing whatever they want to do. Now that's one of those duh sort of things. How could anybody be opposed to that? Well, you have to think through that problem a little bit, because in fact, the surgeons controlled the therapeutic space, if you can say that. And they thought that what I was doing, it was really a we were doing. There were obviously doctors involved and so forth. And they were saying, this is immoral, unethical, you go down the list. And, I enjoy that sort of stuff. This is the whole debate world of what's important and how do you do things. And as a result, these doctors were opposed to us, not because of the less risk, less trauma, but because it didn't go through them. Their view is they're board certified surgeons. They've been endowed by government process, laws, rules, whatever it is, to make all the decisions about what happens to you. Now, I happen to be an open source sort of person, so I didn't agree with that. And the strategy was, in fact, why don't we go find early adopters? And we did do that. And we found a small group of people who said, hey, you're right, I'd love to do this. And so we set up little experimental areas. I could go on for hours on that, but I'll leave you here.
Okay. Well, Sarah, how did you guys meet?
So I returned to Vermont after spending 30 years in Boston working on medical device development, and had made the decision to work with my co-founder to bring the CoreMap technology to the market. And I got here, and I'm a systems person, and I said, okay, I need to understand the system. Who do I need to know? And so I talked to people, found out who I needed to know, made a list, and said, now I need to meet them. So I found John Abele's email address, and I said, I'm back, and I'm doing something that I think you could be very helpful to me with. Would you have coffee with me? And so John has a coffee shop in Shelburne that he likes to go to, so we met for coffee, and it was 2.5 hours. It was amazing, and I go, okay, I don't know how to do this, but I need to have coffee again. So I got to the end, and I said, John, could we have another time to sit down and have coffee? And he said yes, and that was in 2017, and I'd say over the years since 2017, we have coffee once a month, once a quarter. John says whenever I call him and say we need coffee, and he became a supporter of our concept and our attempts to change medicine, and eventually became an investor. And I was incredibly happy to have him as an investor, but just having him as an advisor opened doors for us that never would have been open. So the relationship has many dimensions to it. Most important is the advice and guidance that John has given to me, the financial support certainly, and then the doors that have been opened through our association with him.
Yeah. I want to talk more about your relationship, but John, why did you say yes to the second date?
I knew Peter, her partner, beforehand. In fact, this jacket I'm wearing is from a meeting we held in 2002 at a conference center I had in Ontario. And I was always fascinated by what this brilliant guy, who could explain things though I didn't understand them, but nevertheless, clearly there was value here. And I had always said, they need a Sarah to him. And he found her, or she found him. And the next session is, how do you build on this? My view was, and I've done this before, where I've invested in things without the due diligence. I'm just saying, this has to happen. Whether it's this cure for the heart. By the way, electrophysiology, our company had been involved in it for years and years, obviously long before 2002. And it looked like it was going to be easy to do, and it turned out it wasn't. So there are literally dozens of attempts that people have made, a lot of which failed on the solution that Peter and Sarah came up with.
On the technical solution.
On the technical solution.
Want to hear from each of you what you value most about your relationship.
I'll go first. So as I said, it's multidimensional, but I enjoy the time that we spend together. I always come away with a book to read. They're never easy. I come away with looking at my business differently, and one relates to coffee that we had several years ago, and I've always brought prototypes with me. And so John's looking at prototypes. In the beginning, the things you can't even see, our electrodes are the size of 2 human hairs, and 116 of them go inside your heart. And so we're talking about the way the technology works, and John says to me, you understand that this has broad applicability beyond cardiology. And so anywhere in the body that there's an electrical signal, you can use this technology to better understand what's going on. Because we measure electrical signals, and we measure time. That's really what we do. But we do it in a fashion that nobody has ever seen before. So as a result of that lunch, we went back and I contacted my IP attorneys, and I said, I think we need to file some broad patent protection on this platform, which is now not just enabling a cure for AF, but it's broadly across the body. So we did. So those are a couple of examples of the value of the relationship. And I guess the last one I would give, and this has been since the very first time that we met, before John was associated with the company at all, but he encouraged me never to look at our inventions in a vacuum. Like, exactly what are we going to do within the procedure when we're inside somebody's heart and we're measuring the electrical signals. Think about the larger ecosystem. What comes to get a patient to the table, and how are you going to influence that part, and what happens after they're on the table? So he's pushed me to think broadly about what we're doing.
And John, what do you value about this line of communication with Sarah?
Number one, Sarah's defied some gravity in what she has done. And it's interesting because she doesn't have the official background in order to do it, which, as it turns out, is usually an asset. That's one of those things where your mind now can think without the constraints of what you told can't possibly work. And as she developed her different prototypes, they started to get further and further. And her ability to find people who were able to make the little sub-pieces here. And that's not just a Google search sort of thing. It's way beyond that. And they kept iterating better and better and better and getting to the stage where you might be able to make more than one. And that's the classic challenge in any small company with a product as sophisticated as this one is. So it was that ability to go as far as she's gone, making connections with the people who can influence what is going to happen in the future. And the well had already been somewhat poisoned by all these earlier failures. And so people are naturally skeptical. I come from the, only the paranoid survive background. And by the way, the guy who said that was one of the most successful people in the world. Intel wouldn't exist without his work. But I think the job of somebody trying to help is to be the skeptic. And that's part of the process. But it's the steps that she went with and the connections that she was able to make that I said, this is the right person to guide this ship. Technology needs shepherds. You got to have somebody who not only has the technical knowledge, but they have the EQ and the understanding of who are going to be influential in making it go, who are going to be the barriers, and how can you flip them 180 degrees.
Yeah. Given those previous failures, I guess what makes both of you confident that CoreMap can pull this off?
So from my perspective, we approached our development such that there's really two parts about it. It's this ability with these very small electrodes to take electrical amplitudes and time and location. So it's really three things that we're factoring in. And so instead of designing the catheter that would go in through your groin and up into your heart, we said, we're going to focus on iterating the electrode design. And so what we did is we chose to study on the outside surface of the heart. And so that kept us from having to go back and redesign a catheter every time we tried something that failed. And we tried a lot of things that failed. And one of our mantras was fail fast, fail big, fail fast, so that you can move on and get closer to what your solution is. So in the beginning, when we were defining the electrodes, we said, okay, we'll go to a catheter company. They've been making electrodes for decades, and so we'll go to a catheter company, which was a massive failure. They had no experience working in the scale that we were working in. So we said, step back and said, okay, we need to span the globe and look for people who are making electrodes in the brain, because those are much similar to the work that we're doing. So I guess that, those would be my examples, is that we've already taken the signals on the outside of the heart that tell us that we can do what we need to do. Mm-hmm. And so the work now is finishing the design of taking the catheter and putting it up into the heart, which we've now successfully done in a preclinical model and are preparing to do in humans in early next year.
So essentially you've changed the size of the electrodes.
We've changed the size of the electrode. They're on a micro scale, and then you get very complicated technically, but we stack them in a pair. So when you look at the electrical signals of the two pairs, you subtract them and you're left with only the electrical activity below microns of tissue. And then we have a grid of them so you can measure how fast the electricity is going in any direction. We have positional sensors on the array. And so the fact that we've already done that on the epicardium tells us we can see what we need to see. And so now it's putting the whole system together. So you ask, why are we confident that we can change medicine? It's because we've done that part already. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Did you want to respond to that, John?
Yeah, this is 3D, and normally electrodes you can't. They're just 2D. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And the resolution and the third dimension are really key on that.
Yeah. John, you talk a lot about changing culture and how difficult that is. So you've identified what your technical solution is. What is your strategy for overcoming resistance to, in the medical community to adopting this technology?
Right. For us, we've made the decision that we're going to remain under the radar, and we're going to do all our development, and then we're going to put it in the hands of the luminaries that the world looks to, and we're going to have them study it and them publish on it. So you don't read things about us in the newspaper. You don't see our designs.
Not until this week, yes.
Right. So, so that's our strategy. And so the first time that you will read about the potential results of our technology will be when somebody else has studied it and is presenting on it.
The results are going to be impressive and important, but the most important will be how the results are used, and they lead to successful ablations that work. And ablation is a tricky thing. I have a wife whose ablations didn't work on. And it's a reminder that this is a technology in transition. Medicine now is the real trend, has become personal, personalized. In other words, we're not all the same. We have common organs and so forth, but they're organized differently. And therefore, you can increase the success of any intervention that you might do in the human, if in fact you've done that. And these are going on now in things like electrical mapping in some areas. Not too much in the brain yet, but that's gonna get bigger. But also in the chemistry of the body, in your ability to metabolize things. Understanding that can find out things for those huge number of diseases that we all have, by the way, where we go into the doctor and they say, well, I think it might be, and they don't know. And that's obviously a challenge that's going to continue to dog the medical field. But, if we keep developing things, one of the first questions I ask, is this in addition to or in place of? Because that affects the medical budget, right? And thinking about how, if you can treat a person better and faster, number one, you eliminate the redoing that might have to happen, and hopefully you reduce the ones that don't work at all. And that's been the majority in that particular problem right now.
Right, we should maybe define ablation too for folks who aren't familiar. So I can try, you should correct me. But it's a procedure used to treat atrial fibrillation where surgeons essentially zap an area of cardiac tissue, right? And by doing that, interrupts the wonky electrical signals that are causing the heart to freak out.
Yeah, that was good.
Yeah, yes.
So I would say broadly, though,
yes.
it's not just atrial fibrillation, and that's the really amazing thing is the cure has already been demonstrated in other arrhythmias that are the same from one beat to the next. And I tell people, think about it like a racetrack, the Kentucky Derby. That electrical activity is doing the same thing every single time. And once a physician understands it, they can zap, as Chelsea says, or they can kill a set of cells that interrupts the ability for that electrical activity to get around the track. It gets to the cells that can no longer conduct, and it terminates. And so that's been proven to be very effective in other arrhythmias. But AF has had these challenges where it's not the same from one beat to the next. And they can't put 10,000 electrodes in the heart to try to figure out what's going on. And so our patent portfolio solves those problems. And so what we will identify is in that patient, their AF is being driven from here, and we'll do that with these gigabytes of data that we get with these tiny electrodes. And so our data science team has come up with algorithms to say, in that patient, kill those cells right there, and their AF will terminate. And so that's the cure that our goal is to deliver. And one of the things that John talks about is, faster, more efficient treatment of patients. We're looking for treatment of patients that today they can't treat. They go home on drugs, they get cardioverted, which just means you put them back in sinus rhythm for a little while, but you haven't fixed the problem. They're gonna go into AF again. And so we're looking to treat that patient population for which there are no answers today, and we spend $26 billion a year caring for them.
Yeah, so essentially what's not working about the way ablations are happening now? Why?
Because the physician is blind. He goes in, he will only try it in 1% of the population because he can't see where the drivers are. In the other arrhythmias that are the same, he can study it for as many beats as he wants.
One perspective you might be interested in is the average electrophysiology procedure may take 4 or 5 hours with one patient on the table, sometimes even 8 hours. The pressure on the physician is phenomenal, and so it takes enormous concentration. But can you scale that? That's a tough one. It won't.
Yeah.
Right, right.
So what we are looking to do is in an effective and efficient manner say, this patient, these drivers, here's your map, deliver an ablation, and with the goal of curing the patient.
Yeah.
The map was making the map was what is taking that time in the present procedure. This inherently reduces that time, or should, and then they have to go back and do a therapy, but now you can actually go back and measure after the therapy to see what you did. At this point, before this device, you have to wait and see if 6 months later they feel any better.
What will Sarah be up against, John, in terms of getting physicians to adopt this technology? And what sort of insights have you imparted to her from your career at Boston Scientific about the most effective way to do that?
Well, I think the key is she's been taking those moves. It needs technical papers to describe what it is, what the limitations, maybe even a little bit of the process of how it got there. Because if you can define that well, that adds credibility to how it did get here. Because of the failures of so many procedures before, that had enormous enthusiasm about them. This may fall into that one, and you've got to be careful, because in fact, too much enthusiasm is dangerous. When you see everybody getting excited like that, it's frequently followed by one of those.
So how do you generate the correct amount of enthusiasm? What is
Relationships,
that?
relationships with people.
Yeah.
We talk with the doctors about who should publish, meaning whose names should be on the early articles, whose names on the subsequent articles, where are they published, which journal, whatever it is. That's a huge deal and very important, because this is a very knowledgeable, professional group of people, and that is their standard of understanding.
All right, let's shift more toward CoreMap and sort of the company you're building. And I'm interested, Sarah, in hearing you've spent decades doing this now. What is something you wish you had known a lot earlier in your career?
I guess from a personal perspective, like we're at Tech Jam and people are looking for career opportunities here, it is investing in myself and being curious, becoming a lifelong learner, how important that is. I'm an example of it. I went back to school at 58 years old, and I think had I had that mentality earlier, that would have well served me. Mm-hmm. So my mother used to have something that she would say, make the most of yourself because it's all you have. Mm-hmm. And so I think that is something that's really important.
Yeah. And medtech, remains a pretty male-dominated field, and I'm interested in what you're doing to sort of make CoreMap a diverse company, and how your experience as a woman in this field informs those practices.
So I'm a huge diversity fan from every perspective. I don't focus on gender. I focus on looking at diversity of thought, and that comes from different nationalities, different religions, different genders, from everything that you can bring to the table. I'm pleased we have an incredibly diverse team. We have 26 people. I think the count is somewhere around 30% of us are women, 24 of us are engineers, and so to be running 30% female in a really complex domain where a lot of females aren't coming up through STEM and haven't come up through STEM, and so I'm proud of the fact that we're at that level. We do things, I have a labor attorney who I keep on retainer, and if we have somebody who has right to work challenges and they want to know, can they get their H-1B, can they get it transferred, can they green card, that if we have a candidate we're interested in, then we make that available to them for free, so that if we want somebody on the team, we want to help them solve their problems. And we have a process for candidates that we're looking at that is incredibly expository. So if a candidate comes in that passes an initial screen, all of the leadership team can see that this candidate has made it this far. We have an initial set of interviews, and then they do a project. And so every single position in the company you have to present, whether you're the office manager and we want to see how you write, or how you might approach a problem, or if you're a software developer, you actually have to deliver code during the the interview process. And we have a young Asian woman who delivered some of the best code that we had seen. And it was I was so proud of that hire. She was our first female on the technical team. So, but we can get better. And I'll tell a little story. I was driving over here with my daughter, and we were looking at some of your questions. And at her firm, when a resume comes in, it's de-identified. So the name is gone. You can't tell if they're from another country. Anything that might show their gender is taken off, so that you're really looking at, from an unbiased position, does this person fit the need of what you're hiring for? Which I think is, we can do better. We can definitely do better, and that's, an example. We've reached out to historically Black colleges and universities to see, can we recruit from them? So we're looking for talent, and we just want to be blind to who it is and have as many voices around the table as we can.
You'd raised your hand.
Recruiting players in an orchestra, that's the way it's all done now. Mm-hmm. It's done blind. You just in the mood. Who does the music the best?
Right.
And that's difficult to do in other areas, but you can get part of it anyway.
Yeah.
But I think some people might say that in order to correct for this problem, you need to pay more attention to it, not less, as opposed to eliminating sort of identifying details that you should be seeking people out and sort of making a deliberate outreach effort.
There's lots of types of diversification, hundreds, and I think you want that balance, but it means you have to construct what you're doing in a different way. And, in the 50s, where I'm more of a product, 40s and 50s, we were living more in a chopped salad environment or soup, whatever we want. The metaphor is you didn't focus on backgrounds. You just helped your neighbor. And we had just been through a war. We didn't end up speaking German or Japanese, so we felt pretty good about that. And we've lost a little bit of that. It's almost as if we need another crisis to put ourselves back together again. And the whole problem with medicine generally, medical tech is not a field. It's a huge collection of independent fields that don't talk to each other. And being able to cross those borders, recognizing that if you, from a corporate outside point of view, can enhance the collaboration, and she knows how to do that, that's a huge benefit, obviously to the medicine generally, but also to the individual practices. They will be able to learn more, understand more, collaborate better with others. I spent most of my career doing the craziest things. In fact, a lot of the benefit for Boston Scientific, because we have multiple fields, many fields that we operate in, but we get to see everybody's field, and they only look at one field. And it turns out they keep solving each other's problems, but they don't know it. and so that was a huge asset to us. But this whole business on what is leadership today for a company, you've got the people point of view, recruiting, then maintaining their effectiveness. You've got your relationship with customers, with community, whatever it is, and you're going to have your Twitter. In fact, what was a thing I learned? More people are doing diagnose searches on TikTok than they are on Google. What?
Yikes. Yeah, you, John, talk a lot about collaboration. You gave a TED talk about it, right, in 2009, I think. What, in your view, makes for a successful collaboration? What are the sort of necessary elements, and how do you create those conditions in a workplace?
I think some of them are obvious. It's just, how do you prepare for a meeting? You plan, you design, but the design goes more than just the topic and so forth, and who talks to what. It's almost like having a dinner. Who sits next to whom? And you can plan things just right. That's how the TED meetings started, by the way. Richard Saul Woodman, who started them, said, I want to do a big dinner party. And I do want to have people talk about anything, not a particular topic. And it's how you arrange the order, how you set up what's going to happen. You think about it. You go to a lot of meetings, and you may be intimidated because there's someone sitting over there that you didn't like or you're intimidated by. And how do you address that? Well, if you know it and you think about it, you can address it. It's all about mindset. And in growth mindset now is sort of the hottest thing going in business. And how you recognize what the likely background of people is when you come in. In other words, what they've been doing. You know, maybe not them, but people that they communicate with. That gives you an idea of the world they live in. And therefore, if you're bringing a meeting, and I was very involved in some of these meetings where we mixed specialties. In one of them I ran, we had the president of every single American Medical Association society. And you could see, you didn't need to say anything. You just watched people. You could tell what the hierarchy was, what the pecking order was. And the people walking in that super confident way, cardiac surgeons were the ones who tend to do that. But understanding that's the nature, particularly of people who are accomplished in something. They're really smart, but they're narrowly smart. So how do you create an environment where you take advantage of that? How do you create an opportunity where you can produce collective intelligence, where everybody is operating at their highest level? That's what you're always trying to do in any organization, but it's really hard to do because the default mode is to retreat to your tribe.
So what in a workplace setting specifically, what are some things that are effective in overcoming that?
How you set it up.
Physically, are you talking about the actual physical workspace, or?
Yes, the physical workspace is very significant. And what's the design company from the West Coast that David Kelly started? IDEO. Yeah, IDEO. And IDEO has a package in which they set up an office that you can build. And you can try out settings where the environment is different and watch how people interact as a result of that. So it's an immense amount of research. Every architect worth anything has designed a space where they think people will collaborate the most. But that's a piece of it, but really kind of a small piece. You know, around a circle, for example, is better than a square because you can see everybody, duh. And by the way, Zoom, as it turns out, is in many cases more effective than the physical meeting. But it's more effective in a different way. You can see everybody's face. If you're sitting in a square, you only see the people opposite you, maybe the ones on the end, but you're going to turn your head. Don't have to do that with Zoom. And so it's how you use the tool that makes the big difference. How you recognize that something is going to go wrong, because you may have argued about whether you should invite a person who is clearly a bomb dropper. And you know, though, if you don't invite that person, they now have a tool against you. You didn't have the courtesy to include me. And so that's the dilemma. So there are a lot of tools, and there's books written on this and so forth, that are really books that you ought to read. I got one you ought to read, by the way. I'll make sure the next time.
I'm still working on the last one.
Yeah. And yeah, Sarah, what about CoreMap? How is CoreMap trying to create a collaboration-friendly or just a,
Yeah. So I started saying I wanted to build the company that I always wanted to work at. And so we have many PhD data scientists, we have electrical engineers, we have software developers, mechanical engineers. And so we've created an open space work environment. We've dealt with the pandemic and remote. When we actually got our first funding, we were in the pandemic, so nobody was getting together with anybody. So we had to incorporate remote from the very beginning. And then we had to, as we kind of coming out of it, decide what does it mean to us. We've had people working on our team from Haifa to California, so we have 10 hours of time zones. So we've really worked at designing a person, how they show up based on the role that they have, and designing our space based on the contribution. We have lunch, the entire company, everybody works to be there on 2 days a week to have lunch together. And it's really important to me. Oh my God, we have dietary restrictions. We have vegans, we have gluten-free, we have vegetarians. And so the person who takes care of our meals, it's a really complex job, but it's important to me that everybody eats together. Like there's something that happens when you all sit around the table and the conversation flows and we become more of a community. And so that's really important to me. We set 3 founding principles that we embodied with Vermont products. So when we closed our Series B, we decided we wanted to put together, really curate a package that would congratulate the team and define who we were and how we were going to take this new influx of cash and move forward. And so we picked 3 products from Vermont and sent them to everybody all over the world, wherever they worked, who was on our team. And the first was an amazing pair of sneakers called No Bull. And we defined how we were no bull, that we were going to be brutally honest with each other, we were going to be data-driven, and we were always going to stand up to telling the truth. And then the second was darn tough socks. And we said that we were going to be persistent. We were going to get up earlier, we were going to last longer, we were going to work harder than anybody else. And the third was we had the company Laughing Moon Chocolates make us chocolate hearts because we wanted to be about hearts, our patients' hearts, our team's hearts, and we wanted to work with heart. And those 3 principles are framed in our offices, and they're referred to. You know, yep, we're darn tough on this, or there's no bull on this. And so it's things you can't touch, it's things you can touch.
Yeah. I think, well, one last question from me, and then we'll do a Q&A, audience. What, you know, in both of your views, what do you think is holding Vermont back from becoming a more, a greater force in the world of medical technology?
Nice you left a layup for the end. That's so hard. I'll let you go first.
Yeah, there's a little bit of a, I refuse to answer on the bottom. First of all, let's talk about the change over the last decade, which I think is very important. Obviously, Hula itself, among other entrepreneurial activities, has helped change the culture. But Vermont is a state with a long-term reputation of being kind of anti-business, certainly big business. And I think that we're watching a change take place now. The culture is continuing to change depending on the new people who come here, because that's what happens anywhere. So I think to the extent there's that, a lot of what Sarah just said, applying more broadly. You know, my sympathy goes out to Miro and others who have the job of trying to get people who are purposely, you know, angry at others to get together. And so I think progress is being made, so that's great.
So for me, I think it's a confluence of education, and are we educating students so that they can show up and do the things that companies need done? So life science education is important. I think integrating STEM into all education is really important. So education is first, and then it's a partnership with industry. Companies like us, large multinational companies, can we partner with education, and then community? Can we have a climate that's hospitable to business? And then I think there are 2 social issues that we really need to address, and that is affordable housing and quality, affordable childcare, so that everybody who wants to work can work, and it's not a burden to determine how do I put my children in a safe place while I go to work. So I think it's all those issues kind of wrapped up together. What?
Where's Kathy? Oh, the mic is over there. There we go. Cool. Does anybody have questions for John or Sarah?
Just a follow-up to the last question, what gave you the confidence to be able to launch such a business in Vermont rather than in a tech hub like if you were in Boston for so long?
Yeah, so my roots are here. When Chelsea introduced me, she said I'm a sixth-generation Vermonter. My ancestors were dairy farmers and maple sugar makers, and I wanted to be here. And so that was my first impetus. And then maybe the second was naivety. But we've made it work. It was, how do you find the seed funding? And there are a lot of initiatives for seed funding here. How do you find the seed funding? But the real one, the headwind for us, was how to find the domain-specific talent. That was hard here in Vermont. And so that's why we have two offices, one in Boston where that talent is more readily available. But I would hire data scientists here, I would hire software developers here, and we want to. So what gave me the courage to do it was passion.
Great, thanks very much. I'm a data scientist, by the way.
Oh, wonderful. Perfect. I will find you.
Hi. Oh my gosh, this is tall. I'm Rachel Allard. I run marketing for Resonant Link, and we are also developing technology, have developed technology that changes lives, and it's wireless power. And I'm curious how you balance when you have a technology that people are so excited about. John, you kind of spoke to this, and they want to come up and invest in you and have you go in different directions. How do you stay focused? Because you talked about how the electrodes, what you're doing in the data mapping, it is so applicable to so many different indications and possible solutions in your body. So how do you stay focused?
So I have the benefit of really bad road rash from another company that I worked at where we had an amazing molecular diagnostic technology. I like to say as an engineer, I'm learning the body one startup at a time. And so I was doing something in molecular diagnostics, which I had no business doing because I couldn't spell DNA right 3 times in a row. And so the opportunity to apply this amazing technology came to how the body coagulates, how we identify infectious disease. And the decision was made, we should do them all. And it was near fatal. And so we've made the decision that we are going to be laser focused on enabling a cure for AF, and those other opportunities will come. And we have been approached by both academic researchers and companies working in neurology, and we say the time will come for that, not now.
Can I ask a quick follow-up? How will you know the time has come?
When we put our products in the hands of clinicians, that's when we'll know. When we can show that in 12 months, 12 months after we have performed an enabling procedure, that the patient is now cured of AF. And then it will be time for us to say, okay, we can expand the application of the technology. But we need to be successful there first.
Thank you. Can't wait to see what you do next.
It's going to be a long walk, but I'll do it anyway. So my name is Dave Saracino, and it's a fascinating story to both read about, great article, but to learn about here. And I'm sure along the way you've built an incredible base of researchers, scientists, mentors, advisors, but clearly there was other help, right? So you must have had some sort of incredible investor base. And I was wondering if you guys could just kind of speak to that a bit more.
I can certainly, the investor journey of any entrepreneur is really like an expose on the company. And there's one investor who actually said, I'd like you to walk me through the cap table. And that's an amazing process because every single person that you've engaged with on equity shows up on the cap table. And they go, oh, why is that person there? So I will tell you that in the course of raising $36 million, we have walked away from $30 million in term sheets. 3 different times, a couple of them with my co-founder and I looking at each other and say, we got $11 in the bank and we're gonna walk away from 10. Those were 3 of the smartest decisions we ever made. And I can tell you now with $36 million, I would, and I'm a hiker, it's one of my passions, I would take any one of my investors on a hike with me. And I would have them to my home for dinner. And it is pivotal in terms of when you hit troubled waters, where your investor is going to align, Are they going to align looking for their returns? Are they going to align with you on your outcomes? And so for anybody thinking about starting a company and thinking about taking capital, because you need it, think long and hard about the types of investors that you're going to tie your wagon to. John?
I couldn't say it better. Who you get your money from is more important than how much you get.
Yeah.
And it'll play out over time. But I think that's something that sometimes people get tempted to make the other decision. In fact, you were tempted, but you made the right decision. So I think also there's the question of how much you need, and everybody wants to have room and so forth. But there's something magical about the pressure. And back to the fact that you're teaching people things where they've had more education than you have and you're teaching them. Somehow, when you are learning for a need, two things happen. Number one, you learn faster. And number two, it sticks. And if you could only do that for every school child everywhere, they would learn and they would retain twice as much. And so I think there are sort of multiple lessons you get when you are having this opportunity, and that's what it is, although sometimes it doesn't seem like that. The people, the friends you've made so far, and what you can see if you do it right going forward. And there's going to be other bumps in the road, but having those original friends, both investors in just the community of medical people, even the enemies, the people who are opposed or supporting another company, the fact that you can talk with them professionally, that's the whole concept of co-opetition. At some level, we all have common objectives.
Yeah.
And that's what you want to take advantage of.
And John brings up a really good point, and that is how much money to take. And so coming out of the gate, if you take $36 million, you're effectively going to give your company to investors. And so there's a philosophy that we've navigated, which is raise just enough, be hungry, and demonstrate something. And so we've done that, and we've probably now are like 5 rounds of investing, including our early seed funding. And there's something to be said for having to demonstrate something in order to go out and raise your next money. So who it comes from and how the cadence of how you take it is really important.
I appreciate your answers. John, I'm just wondering, what's the next book that Sarah and, quite frankly, all of us should be reading next?
We're living, in my mind, in an age of phenomenal opportunity. Now, we're also living in an age of phenomenal risk. And where we invest our time is sort of a tricky thing. But I don't know if you, what's the name of the guy who is trying to live forever, and he's going at Google now, and he developed the first machine to Ray Kurzweil. Ray Kurzweil is trying to live forever, but more importantly, he's also trying to document his brain. You've probably seen there's a group of people who are basically trying to figure out how to document their brain so others can have the benefit of their brain in later years. But he has a law that talks about the acceleration of innovation. And when you think about it, here are the reasons. Number one, we can communicate in ways we never could before. We can collaborate in ways we never could before. Tons of software to do that. And also, it's not just software, it's people are using it, so we're learning that. We have new tools to test things, to build things that never existed. We just dreamed about those. Ways of learning what is going on. For example, there are groups of patients for rare diseases that get together thanks to Google and thanks to invention that basically lets people find people with the same disease that they have. Now that sounds maybe like a small thing, but that is an invention. First of all, that is a business. Secondly, for the people in it, it gives them a life back. I mean, in terms of value to society. So I think, the field is open here. Obviously, I like things that's going to have a real benefit to society at the end. And whether it's going to be, philanthropic or for-profit. For-profit is one of the only ways you can get real sustainability over time. So you've got to figure out what that balance is, and there's 1,000 opportunities between borrowing, giving, and the loans or whatever it may be in between. So from that point of view, the variation of opportunities of how to do things, starting a business, is much easier in terms of resources. It's probably more difficult from a regulatory world, but I would argue the balance is on the new technologies that will allow you to do things that couldn't have been done before. And Sarah is a living example. She defied, I've seen people do catheter design of all sorts, and she's, gone ahead of what those people have done. So this couldn't have been done, let's say, certainly 20 years ago, and I'm thinking the starting of the web, because obviously that tool is very, very important.
So what's the title of the book I should be looking for in my local bookstore?
I think Loon Shots was good. So one of the ones that John told me to read was Loon Shots. And it talks about companies that maybe had market share, lost it because they took their eye off innovation. It talks about studying failures, like learning from failures. And it helps bridle that optimism that entrepreneurs have, because as John says, you can be too optimistic. And so I found Loon Shots was a pretty good one.
Yeah.
Great, thank you so much.
Another one called Scatterbrains. You might take a look at, that's a new one. But again, recognizing that you're trying to, when you're starting a business, there's a lot of pieces. Being an entrepreneur is not something you learn academically. You don't go to school to learn basketball either. I mean, I guess you do, but you learn basketball by playing it. And entrepreneurship is really the same thing, because you've got to be very, very wide as well as deep in certain areas. And you have to know enough about a topic that if you're hiring an expert, you can tell whether they're really not an expert.
Thank you.
Do we have time for one more question? Or, all right, one more?
Hello. I was a vendor for Boston Scientific and Natick and Framingham back in the mid-'90s. And I remember even then it had a really good culture. It's very welcoming to people that were trying to sell them stuff. So a couple things. You mentioned being a fan of open source, but then Sarah talked about patenting. So how do you kind of navigate that? And then a question I've asked entrepreneurs for years is I've heard people say that when you're starting a business, it's the business, family, and friends, choose two. And I'm wondering how you navigate that.
Balance. It's like two porcupines trying to mate. You work your way forward on that. Just as an observation, as we grew, we went from zero to today. I guess we've got 42,000 employees and global and so forth. At each level of growth, you need a different type of leadership. And you discover it the hard way, by the way, and you struggle, now we don't have that skill, and we need to have that skill. Some of that's obvious, some of it's not obvious. But so many things are changing. The environment in which your business is growing is the environment we're living in today. And how many of you seen the movie, The Social Dilemma?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's an example of the extremes that are taking place today. And if you are a leader anywhere, it's more difficult than it used to be. My sympathy goes out to university leaders in particular. And recognizing that, that's an opportunity to actually change the method, but following the principles that Sarah laid out. But as you grow, you're going to find out you're going to need a different way of looking at it. Advisors are going to help, but at the end of the day, you are going to have to change.
Right. And on the subject of the leadership, I learned that in my very first startup, which was 30 years ago. And what I learned from there, and it stuck with me, is that the leader of the company to get from A to B of a particular part of the company is not necessarily the one that takes it from B to C. And they're not any less of a person. They're just as competent as they were before. It's just you need something different. So recognize that early and be ready for it. I color code my org charts and I say, how's this person going to be 12 months from now? And so I look at every position and know whether they're going to be able to evolve to the next level in that role. It doesn't mean I throw them out the door, it just means I have to change. So I have basically no titles in my organization. There's one level, and that is if you're ahead of a team or you're not ahead of a team. And there's no managers, supervisors, vice presidents, directors, any of that stuff. For just that reason, it allows us the flexibility and the preconception that we're going to change. And sometimes when I struggle with a hire, I have one right now, and I said to the guy, ultimately, we want you on the team. We're going to get you on the bus. We're going to put you in a seat. Maybe it's not the right seat, and we'll move you, but we just aren't sure what that seat is right now. And so I think leaving yourself the flexibility to adapt to how you're going to change and be a different company in 6 months, because if you're not, you're out of business. Because you just can't stay the same and be on a scale. And in terms of open source and patents, we have amazing IP counsel. And so we take our inventions to them and we talk about, should that be trade secret or should we patent that? And we allow an expert to guide us through that decision.
Did you find that you had to choose two between business, family, and friends as an entrepreneur? That was one of the questions.
No. No, I don't. I figure out there's a place in all of them, and I will, do not misunderstand me that when you do something like this, it is literally 24/7. Martine Rothblatt did the keynote last year with Kyle, and I was talking to her about my company, and I said, I feel like in the beginning when we were in our seed funding, I was trying desperately to give birth to this company. And then I gave birth, and I had this infant that needed to be taken care of 24 hours a day, and then it got big enough that it was trying to kill itself. And so I had to just make sure I was there 24 hours a day so it didn't kill itself. But it really is. And the way that you avoid becoming single dimensional is to still be excited about what you do. And so that allows me, I hike every day. I get out, if it's a short one or a long one, and I stay close to my friends. Mostly my family. My family is my friends. So making time and making them be important.
Thank you.
And every decision you make, remember, is going to be looked at from multiple perspectives. It's the decision itself, but also it's a precedent. Every decision you make is looked at by everybody else. What are the implications of this for me? And what is the philosophy? Any leader, from my point of view, needs to be an educator. And they need to be constantly making sure that message of why we're here, what our purpose is, and what you have to do. And the bigger you get, the more difficult it is to be able to make that work.
I can imagine an org chart that was above 45,000 people. So like that's just inconceivable to me. I'm not going to color code that one. I'd be red.
All right, on that note, I think.
Yeah. I have one thing to say, and that is thanks to Russ. This is an amazing place, Russ, Robert. What you've done here is literally amazing. Thank you.